Welcome to the Culture Based Podcast.
Sunny days, hanging my clouds away. Da-na-na, something, da-na-na, da-na-na-na-na,
This
some
is how
of
we
them
get so quick.
Sesame Street.
That's good.
Welcome to the podcast.
Man, I surely hope you tear that out.
Oh, it's staying. It's staying. Culture Based Podcast. What up? I'm Dustin. He's Blake. Happy to be here.
Oh, I
You
am
happy?
too. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for having me today, Dustin.
There was a lowercase question mark at the end of that statement. It wasn't a
The
full
softest
capital
question mark I've ever heard.
Yeah. Happy to be here. Happy to be here. Anyway, we are happy to be here. We are excited today because we're going to talk about becoming the coach that your team needs. We're waist deep at least now in fantasy football season. Are you doing that, Blake? Are you doing the fantasy footballs?
Nope. I like to enjoy life.
When's the last time you did it? Because I know you used to do it.
I did it probably in 2010, and then I found myself rooting for people that I never would root for in my life, and I was like, I'm not okay to do this as a person.
Yeah. I'm doing one this year. A couple years ago, I got drug into 3. Worst season of my life. It was not fun.
Yeah.
And I've learned to care less about it. I'm really more into it for the camaraderie. Like, apparently I started a quarterback this past week that didn't even play. I'm looking at you, Deshaun Watson. I don't know why you didn't play. I just went back to it and I saw that I opened it up today and I saw that I lost like 130-60.
Okay.
And I was like, so someone just didn't play. That's what happened. Yeah, it was a couple of those. So anyway, not off to a great start, but you know what? Like a good coach,
State Farm's there.
You just got that's a neighbor.
Oh,
that's not a good coach. That's a neighbor, like a good neighbor. State Farm is there, but we're not talking about how to be a good neighbor today. We're talking about how to become the coach that your team needs. And we're just, you know what, like a good coach, I'm going to bounce back and make sure that everyone in my starting roster this week on my fantasy football team is actually alive and well enough to play. So, but before we get into the coach topic today, I want to remind you that we're here to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop a scalable team to get there. If you are listening on an audio podcast platform, thank you so much for listening. We would love a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on. Helps get this content out further and reach more people who need it. If you're watching this on YouTube, welcome. Good to see you virtually. For those on the audio podcast, Blake just waved. Let's see what you miss when you're not watching us on YouTube.
It was a good wave. It was a really good wave.
It was a good wave. It was good. 4 out of 5.
Okay.
On that wave. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. We would love for you to hit like, subscribe. Like is the thumbs up thing, by the way. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell so that whenever we post new content or eventually decide to go live with one of these, then you will be notified first. You'll be in the in crowd. That's what we're getting at. The bell means you're in the in crowd. You can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, all those types of places at The Culture Base. That's BASE. And you can sign up for your free 30-minute strategy session with us at theculturebase.com. Learn more how we can help you and your team grow, and specifically today, how we can help you become the coach that your team needs. Listen, part of retaining your best team ever, which we talked about recently, is becoming the greatest coach you can be. Much of your business's success comes from your ability to inspire others to action. So, Blake, how can we become the coach that our team needs? Draw me a stat.
Draw you a stat. Well, I think personally, one of the best things you can do is to be in constant breakthrough. When you are in constant breakthrough and growing and developing, everyone else will too, who's hungry for it, right? Like, who's on your team. If you are like, I've arrived, I think you almost deplete what your team's going to do. When you're like, oh, someday you guys will be like me, you just set the bar really low for your team, and now they see a box. Okay. So
Mhm.
what if you were constantly gave this idea that learning and getting better and development was something that you didn't just believe for those lower than you in your organization, but you preached it and you showed it nonstop. You
Yeah.
were a constant breakthrough. I love talking to my team about things. We're in the electrical field, but I'll talk to our team about anything. But if I'm like, oh, hey, there's this new technology out right now, I'm studying a bunch on it. Wouldn't it be cool if we could do something like this? Like, what do you think we could do? And just having those conversations, no matter what, whether they're entry level, mid level, top of your organization, it doesn't matter. The more you can have passion behind it, it's going to motivate your team at an intrinsic level that I don't think we understand that it does. So it
Mm.
does quite a bit.
Yeah, you're setting the bar, right? You're setting that tone. Culture value that we had at the last organization I was with was set the tone, and what we meant by that is, kind of raise that level of standard. As a leader, there's a myth out there, and we can argue whether this myth is true or false. But there's a myth of like no one will rise up to the bar that you're at as a leader; they will always go just under it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? It's why like leaders wear suits a lot. It's not
Mhm.
because they're expecting their subordinates to wear suits. It's just they're setting a level that they know just under that might be a polo and some slacks or something, and they can. That's a dumb example, but you get the idea what I'm saying here. Like you're setting that bar and understanding that those that follow you may not reach that bar. So whatever bar you want them to be at, you kind of have to go to the next level
Mhm.
so that they reach the bar that you want them to be at. That's what he's saying here when he's talking about being in constant breakthrough. He's saying never settle,
Yeah.
never get to the point where, which by the way, I think that was, I could be wrong on this. Great book, Never Settle. Yes, that is a book. Great book, Never Settle. One of my favorite sports journalists, Marty Smith. He's from Virginia, like me, great Commonwealth. He wrote a book. His second book just came out on leadership principles, which I'm super excited to read. But his first book came out called Never Settle. And that's what he's talking about here is never be okay feeling like you've arrived, because once you've gotten there, it's over for you. It's kind of like why you see scientifically that a lot of people who quote unquote retire and lose a sense of purpose,
Mm.
their health declines very rapidly.
Mm.
It's because at some point they've gone, I've arrived, I'm ready to start drawing out of my 401k and just not have much of a purpose in life anymore. And so their health begins to decline rapidly. And so if you use that same analogy, Blake, I think for your team,
Mhm.
right? If you feel like you've arrived, then the health of your team will slowly begin to die down. I just hit my microphone. Hopefully you didn't hear that.
Yeah, we did. But anyway, there is also, as we go through things here about how to be a better coach, I think it's important to see that there is inward work that has to be done as much as outward work that you have
Mm.
to do for your team and getting in places
Yeah.
of uncomfortable positions, right? So when we talk about being in breakthrough, even in that, there is an inward thing that's happening behind closed doors as you're early in the morning and you're doing the work, and there's an outward side of that as well where you're sharing that with your team, you're helping them see things, you're bringing them along with you on this journey, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
there is a lot here on almost every one of the things we're going to talk about. Think about it for an inward transformation and an outward transformation that you've got to step into, because at the end of the day, like um we're only going to be as successful is as much discomfort that we're willing to take on, right? Like
Mm.
we're only going to be as successful with the amount of discomfort that we're willing to have in our life and the amount of stress that we're going to allow to be in our presence. And when you can deal with those things in a way that you're showing your team that at the same time, man, you're going to be an awesome coach.
Yeah, I was just thinking while you were talking too that being this great coach, being this great leader of your organization. And I know we don't really talk about leadership too much. This one's going to lean a little bit more leadership heavy than what we normally do, but it's
Mhm.
all for the sake of the culture. It's all for the sake of the sustainable growth that we talk about as we're building scalable teams. I was thinking that being a leader is less of a solo expedition and more of an Oregon Trail
Mm,
type of thing. You know what I
yeah.
mean? You're
Yep.
talking about making sure that the people are following. Listen, if no one's following you, I got a hard thing to tell you. Not a leader.
Yep.
Not a leader. You might be leading yourself, which is 100% great. But unless you can turn around and look behind you and see people following in the same path that you're on, you're
Yep.
not really leading anyone other than yourself.
Mm-mm.
Which again is definitely necessary. But is this a Lewis and Clark or is this an Oregon Trail?
Yeah.
Are we solo expedition here, or are we leading people on this journey towards a greater purpose?
Yeah.
So,
Another item here that I think's pretty important when we're kind of questioning like how do we become the coach someone needs? I think there are a lot of times that we want to focus on being the best technician and I've got to be the best this and that's great. I think those things are great, but if you think that that is a precursor to being a great coach, I think you're missing it.
mm, hmm
Um,
hmm
I don't know that Michael Jordan would be a great coach. I don't know if he would be. And
yeah. I mean,
you
they've
know,
asked Peyton Manning that before
mhm,
about being a coach, and he's just like, I don't know if I'd be a great coach.
yeah, and he wants to be great at whatever he does. So it's like,
Exactly.
and that's why like I think okay, if there was this guy who was a center or and a tight end at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, what do you
Mm.
think his outcome would be?
Um, Maybe blow out a knee and end up coaching his son's Pee Wee football team.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's and probably does insurance, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
okay.
He does.
What
He does
about
insurance. That's my favorite.
he does insurance?
He doesn't sell it.
Nope.
He is it.
He is the insurance. But what if I told you this guy actually instead has like 5 or 6 rings for the New England Patriots and has coached one of the greatest franchises, even as a Colts player, it's hard to say that out loud. But
Yeah.
one of the greatest franchises that we have. That guy was not known for being the best center, was not known for being the best tight end. He did not play professionally, but he came to understand the game so well and understand how to get people to operate at a certain optimal position and at a certain optimal level. Now, I think a lot of people would be like, oof, I don't know if I use Belichick in a podcast on culture. Um, he does have a culture. He has a very clear culture. His
Yeah.
culture is a culture of winning. And I'm sure you could be like, well, yeah, but every culture is a culture of winning. Not true. I don't think that every culture, even in the NFL, the whole main thing is about winning because they don't all set up the metrics and the standards and the expectations and accountability that Bill Belichick does.
Yeah.
So,
So good.
yeah.
So good. I'm a lifelong Braves fan, and we're in the postseason, entering into the postseason right now. I was watching a video on their Instagram this morning just about like how since spring training they've been talking about the World Series and where they're going and having that mindset in front of them. And so when you're playing over 100 something games in the regular season of your sport, right? Like that's a lot of games that you might go, okay, well, if we lose one or two, like that's fine.
Mm,
And yes, it probably is fine, but they're not settling for that.
yeah.
Because the culture for them is a culture. They said in this little 2.5 minute video, they said every game we go out and expect to win.
Mm,
We expect to win. We're not surprised when we win. And
yeah.
that may sound cocky, but it's that culture that they've set of we are a winning organization.
Yep.
And what we do is win.
Mm.
We don't do insurance.
Yeah.
We do win. You know what I mean? We
Yep.
do win. So let's talk through some best practices here. I think it's important that we stay practical in in our discussion as much as possible, and we can talk about how great Bill Belichick and coaches like them are for days. But let's talk about some best practices for coaching your dream team. What's the first thing you think of that you think of best practices here, Blake?
Consistency, hands down, consistency. You're going to want, if you set up some coaching program, or you're going to want to develop someone or lean into someone, and you can't coach everyone, right? Like, it's not set up that way. You can coach those you can coach. And I think a lot of times we hesitate because we want it to be perfect before we want to do it. And that perfection is the biggest enemy of you being better at being a coach, because it's going to be ugly when you start. It's not going to look pretty. You're going to say stupid things, and you're going to have to backtrack, and you're going to have to learn the best way to do it. But consistency is the thing that shows care. Not that you ask the best question to them or you challenge them on the right thing, but consistency shows, hey, you're in it for the long haul, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that there are those, I could tell you about moments that were significant in my life with my mom, but more than anything, she was just consistent. She was always
Yeah.
there, and if I needed something, I just went and talked to her.
Yeah.
We're not writing books about it, but it was significant, and it's something I go back to. So if you can't do consistency, don't 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 even start this, because what you'll do is start having this mentality that people don't trust the things you start.
I want to let that sink in for a second. People won't trust the things that you start. Is that what you
Mhm.
said?
Yep.
Gosh, that's so deep and so good, so true. Consistency you're going to see is going to kind of be an umbrella, I think, for everything that we talk about for the rest of the show, because you can do all these things as one-offs, or you can be a really good starter at things. A lot of people are really great starters but really
Mm,
terrible finishers. If you start these things but you're not consistent with them, it doesn't really matter. You better off just not doing them at all.
yeah.
Some of these practices. But the second thing we want to talk about is strategy, and specifically in how you lead your team one on one. I will just say a side note for a second. I heard this a few years ago in talking about how many people report to you, and being able to lead your team effectively. And this may be impossible in your current scenario, but I would encourage you to figure out a way to make it possible. And that is that you need to only be leading enough people directly that you can share a pizza with.
Ooh.
Because if you have more than that, you're spreading yourself too thin, and you can't go from there. And so if you look at some great leaders, they had some other great leaders around them that they led
Hmm.
and allowed those leaders to lead. You can't lead the janitor the same way you lead the HR rep, the same way that you lead your director of marketing, the same way that you lead a sales rep. You just can't. And so really fine tune and kind of rein in that org chart and accountability chart for you to be able to kind of just only have a handful or less
Mm.
of people that report directly to you. But with that, you need to be strategic about your one-on-ones. How often you do them is going to vary depending on your organization. It's going to vary depending on the size and health of your team. How often you do them, how long they are when you do get in the session, the order and structure of that session. What's that look like? It'd probably be something that we should talk about on this podcast eventually, is how to have a really good one-on-one.
Mm.
Um, but just thinking through strategically every part of that sit down is super, super important, because those are the times that you get their undivided attention.
Mm.
You're not in the field, you're not on the shop floor, you're away from the distraction of the day to day, and you have their undivided attention. So, what are you going to use that time for? Be as
Mm.
strategic as possible.
Yeah. One thing about that is pretty important is, a lot of times we, like Dustin was saying, we want to have this stuff for everyone, especially when we see like, let's say you do some kind of coaching moment and you're like, man, that was really impactful. And then you get like, man, we got to get this to everyone. And you start trying to build out this massive, complex system. And it's good for everyone to have that. And I heard someone say this one time, what's better to do is to do for one what you want to do for the many.
Andy
Right?
Stanley.
Yeah, there it is. Yep. Do for one what you want to do for the many. Really invest where you need to invest, just like Dustin's saying, invest, and then teach about how that investment can go to the next level and how your team that you're investing in can invest in the next level. I mean, it is the biggest Ponzi scheme there is, but that's okay too, right? Like it is a pyramid scheme.
Yeah, leadership should be a pyramid scheme.
Yep.
It should be. We also talk about a lot about accountability, and I think this is something that a lot of teams and cultures and organizations will shy away from because they feel like it's very oppressive to walk around with the proverbial ruler in the hand going like, all right, where are we at on this? And you said you were going to do this. But the most caring thing you can do for your team is to follow up on what you asked them to do. Not nag, not micromanage, just have checkpoints in place to say, okay, next week we're going to come back and we're going to talk about this thing that you said you were going to do this week. That is going back to the top. That is consistency. That is clarity. That is allowing them to see what's most important. What's the most urgent and important thing for them? Those are the things to keep them accountable on. And so by doing that, you show that you care. It's the same thing of why we discipline our children. We discipline them not because we don't care about them or we have negative feelings towards them. We discipline them because we care enough about them to see them grow. Yeah. And so that's what the purpose of accountability is here. If you're using accountability as a weapon instead of a tool, you might need to check your reason of why you're wanting to keep people accountable. Is it just so that you can save your job? Is it because your boss is coming down on you and saying, if we don't hit these numbers and if your team doesn't hit these numbers, you're out of here? Yeah. That's a lot of pressure. And that's when accountability turns into a weapon. But I think if you can use accountability as a tool, you can use it in a way that shows your team that you care enough about them to follow up on the things that you asked them to do and to follow up on the things that you said you were going to do for them. Yeah. Accountability is a two-way street. This is not something that you get to hand down and it doesn't get to come back to you. Like accountability has to come back to you as much as it has you to send out to those on your team. You have to be willing to have someone on your team walk up to you and say, you said you were going to do this. I haven't seen that yet. I'm sitting on my hands waiting to do my job until you get me that information that you said you're going to get me.
Right.
You have to have that. It's a two-way street.
One of the dangers of coaches trying to emulate other coaches is we tend to only try to emulate the extremes that we see of those coaches. So for example, Bob Knight. I'm an IU basketball fan. I loved Bob Knight. I loved his style, but he was a screamer, a chair
thrower. Yeah.
But that's not who he was all the time. How do you think he got to a level where he could do certain things like that? You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't know the full story. We just see the personality at a certain extreme and therefore try to define, well, coaching must be just jam it down their throats until they get it. No, see, that's the problem is we're trying to emulate one aspect of a personality instead of understand that the thing we ought to be doing is understand how to be a good coach. End of story. How do I hold someone accountable? How do I say hard things? Well, I've got to build it up and I got to build the bank account up in pennies in order to spin the dimes of hard words said. But I've got to also be building them and helping them understand the game. And by the game, I mean what they're doing in work. Like, what are the expectations? Are they clear enough? Hey, let me know. Have I not made this clear enough? Okay. Well, just letting you know, if you don't get this done, here is the consequence.
That's right.
Here is said consequence. And if they don't hear that, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of a meeting and I get up and I throw a chair, like, what the hell is that? Nobody's going to be like, okay, what's happening? I don't feel safe. Like, I'm out. But it's because I've never made those things clear. I bet Bob Knight was pretty clear about his consequences and what they look like. And They probably had verbiage of shoving up a foot into someone's, and it's just like that was how it was. But I know that that's not the way it always was.
Mm.
You can't
Yeah.
build legacy and have a good team and be a good coach on one, like it's just a one note horn there at that point, and it's just not good.
Yeah. Yeah. A one note horn. I like that.
A one note horn. I think another thing is you got to be careful as a good coach to not just give good answers or give the answers of whatever it is you want them to learn. I think you'll see a difference at times when someone says you're right a bunch. Okay, you're right. They don't get it. When all of a sudden they have epiphany and they're like, "Ooh, that's right." That's when they get it. Okay, so that's the difference here is when you just give answers over and over and over, you're not letting them come to a place of creativity to understand how to take something to the next level. I would actually say you're being a very bad coach and you're becoming an impediment to their ability to grow because you're just giving them the answer, which means you're a part of that scenario from here on out. Okay, of the technical. You need to get away from that. You need to be guiding the character, the understanding, the creativity, the culture. If you've got to be in every aspect because you're giving all the answers, you're missing the boat.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. You've got to, and we talked a lot on this podcast before about asking the right questions. You got to ask the right questions in order to lead them to their own conclusion. You can't constantly just give them the answer and expect them to have any sort of consistent results on their own without you having to be there to constantly give them those answers. That's not good leadership. That's just a cheat partner, handing you cheat codes all day. And so, there's this concept of teaching a man to fish rather than giving him a fish. And so it's the same thing here. Like you want to teach your team how to problem solve on their own so they're not coming to you with every minute problem. You want them to be leaders of themselves and leaders of their own issues and leaders of their own domain, essentially, right? Like you want them to be able to do the things on their own without constant and just bringing the bigger things to you and not all the little small fish constantly. And so you're teaching them how to be great leaders when you're asking them the right questions and you're leading them to that conclusion. I love what you said, Blake, about you're right versus that's right. So good. That's so good.
And as they come to you, and it might be hard, it will be hard pretty early on because you're like, oh man, I just want to give them the answer because I'm going to lose money if they don't do it this way. You've got to gauge that. Sometimes see it as the cost of education though. Okay. Yeah. And when someone comes and says, hey, what's the answer here? I need to know what's the answer. One of the best things you can do is just say, what do you think the answer is? What do you think? Think about it. How would you do this? And this is where I kind of have this like 3-step process to creative problem solving. Anytime, and we have this actually, I'll give you an example. We had this instance happen a while back where I had a foreman who was reaching out to one of my partners all the time and just like, didn't seem like he was getting it. My partner hit me up and he was like, hey, I'm not sure about this person. Really not sure that they're going to make it in this role. And so I was like, okay, well, let me work with them, see what I can kind of see in this. And when I was working with them, they called me and they were like, hey, I've got this problem. And it was something they could have figured out. Something so like, what's going on? And I could have answered it. The problem is I knew I would have got a call in about 15 minutes later for the next one. And I just said, hey, I'm not going to give you the answer on this one, but I'm going to tell you how to go about this process. Okay. I said, what I want you to do is I want you to look at the problem and I want you to say, to be like, what are all the questions I have about this problem? And I want you to write them all down. Write all the questions that you can think of about this problem. Step 2, if you were the most creative person in the world, how would you solve it? Okay, if you were the most creative person, how would you solve that? Then come up with your plan, call me and tell me what you're going to do. Don't call me anymore asking me what to do. I want you to call me and tell me what you're going to do, because this will help you start to feel comfortable to take action on your own It's going to make me feel a little comfortable knowing, okay, they are going down the right path. And there were things that they would come back with that I was like, not the right thing, but I'm going to let it ride because it's worth it. It's worth this person getting this.
Yeah.
And so I kind of shared that process with them. And they're like, okay, shut up. Never mind. I got it. And then 2 weeks later, one of my partner, he hit me up and he was like, hey, did you say something to so-and-so? Because they're killing it right now. And I was like, oh, good. They're now the head of sales at my company. So just because they started thinking creatively and started challenging thoughts, instead of just looking for someone else to give them the answer, you force them, right? That's a good coach. And I'm not saying that because, oh, I'm such good. I'm saying that because a good coach doesn't just give answers.
Yeah.
They help people learn how to come up with the answers.
Yeah. Yeah. That's spot on. We talk often too about having the right systems in place and the right processes and SOPs and all those types of things for your leadership and for your culture and for your organization. And really, this topic today is no different. You should have essentially a playbook, right? If we go back to the Belichick reference, like he has a playbook of what that winning culture looks like, and he knows that in every August it's going to look like this, and every February it's going to look like this, and he has that type of thing to be an incredible winning coach the way he is. But he also understands that these systems are not rule books.
Yeah,
there's a difference between systems and rule books. You have to play by the rules. You don't have to always stick to the system.
Yeah.
You don't always have to stick to the script, because everyone on your team that you lead is a completely different person.
Yeah.
And that sounds like so obvious. Well, obviously I know Dan isn't the same as Sue, but let me just tell you, like, oftentimes you're guilty of leading Dan the same way that you lead Sue.
That's right.
And you're so frustrated because you don't understand why it's not working. It's because they are completely different people. And so sometimes you have to be willing to step outside of your system and lead the person instead of leading the role.
Yeah. So good. There to realize that coaching others is not about you, but it's about them.
Yeah.
Is massive. And it's something that when I go into coaching calls, I have to remind myself every time, because I want to jump, like you're saying, into the schedule or into the system or into the skeleton of here's how we do a coaching call. But the reality is I'm not serving them if I do it my way. I'm serving them if I help them come to one thing, right? Like that's my goal of every coaching call is how can I help them in one way take one step in the right direction? Because I'll tell you, the whole reason we even started doing coaching calls was because at annual reviews, and we're like, hey, what's your goal for the year? They'd be like, oh, it's blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, good goal. And next year came around and I was like, hey, what's your goal for the year? And it was the exact same goal. And it was like, oof, okay, well, we don't get to the place we want to get by accident. It's going to take intentional growth. And so if the goal is I want to help them take one step to overcome one thing, to come to one epiphany, to take a step in the right direction in one way, man, that's a better one. Okay. They're getting there quicker and hopefully in the right direction.
Yeah. And as we're talking about goals too, I want to wrap up with this final best practice. You need to understand that the people that you're leading will only care about you as much and the things of the organization as much as you and the organization care about them. And so one really great thing I've seen a lot of great companies implement in the last couple of years is when they're asking them, hey, what your annual goals are, and they're talking about the annual goals within the organization, they're also going, hey, what's a personal goal of yours this year? Yeah. Do you want to run a 5K? Do you want to release a book? Do you want to become a speaker on a regular basis? Like, what are your personal goals? And let's take one and let's allow the company to come alongside you and maybe help in a real practical way, but really more so you're helping because you're holding them accountable to the personal things that they want to do. They've come to it. It's not imposed by anyone else other than themselves, saying in this next section of time, I want to be a better person in this way, or I want to grow in this way as a person separate from my role at the organization. If you get to know them as people and not just employees, then you have an opportunity to usher them in their personal growth as well. And when they see that you care just as much about their personal growth as you do about their business growth and what helps your bottom line at the end of the day, then you will be blown away at the level that they can rise to.
Yeah. That's, if people heard anything else, that one is so important, because in organizations, we tell people to leave their personal life at home and then come in, and you got your work life here, and you go to church, that's the church you, and you go to family functions, that's the family. We're not that skilled to do that. If you're like, oh no, I can separate it really well, you can't, or you have multiple personalities, and those are very different things. The reality is we live holistic lives. We are holistic as a person. Your work stuff is going to affect your home stuff. Your home stuff's going to affect your work stuff. When you can just allow it to be, I'm a person and this is the thing I'm doing, and I'm a person and these are the people I'm impacting, you're going to get so much more loyalty, growth, connection. People will want to be around you, not because you're the nicest, but because you're someone who cares. And think about any teacher you've ever had that you actually loved. They held you accountable. They were consistent. They taught you in a way that others didn't teach you, but they cared.
Yeah, that you love them because they made you better.
Yes.
Yep. Right. At the end of the day, we all have people like this. Just to peel back the curtain a little bit, Blake is that one of those few people in my life where when I'm around him, he makes me want to be better at everything. Not in a competitive way. It's just more of a spurring on this like, ooh, yeah. And I get fired up and I'm just like, yeah, let's go do it. And so those are the people that you are naturally attracted to and you want to be around. And so why not create that type of culture at your organization? Well, hopefully you've picked up some good tips and tricks today and some practical ways to help you become the coach that your team needs. Next time we get together, we're going to talk about dealing with difficult people. And we kind of ended this conversation talking about seeing your team as people and not employees. And so I can't wait to dive into that, because we all have difficult people in our organization that we have to deal with all the time. And so we're going to kind of give you some best practices on dealing with difficult people. I want to remind you that you can go to theculturebase.com to get a free 30-minute strategy session with us, and any of the things that we talk about, any of the ways for you to know your leadership, to show where you're going to go, to develop a scalable team to get there. Any of those things we'd love to talk to you about. You can do that at theculturebase.com. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. We cannot wait to talk to you then. Next time on the Culture Base Podcast.